If you asked 100 Transformers fans to rank the most iconic characters, you'd get 100 different lists. But here's what's wild, almost none of them would agree on where to put the franchise's first female Autobot, even though she's been in more continuities than half the characters ranked above her. So today, we're ranking every major Transformer and explaining exactly what makes each one matter, starting with the one who proves how complicated Iconic really is. Arcee. Arcee has been around since 1986 and has appeared in at least 7 major continuities across 40 years. That's more than most Autobots on this list. But here's the thing, she was originally written as a romantic interest, and fans have spent decades pushing back on that framing. Every continuity reinvents her. G1 made her a sidekick. The Bay films turned her into a straight-up combatant. IDW Comics rebuilt her as a trauma-driven warrior with real depth. Her evolution basically mirrors how the franchise itself changed its thinking about female characters. She opens this list not because she lacks importance, but because her iconic status is still genuinely debated, which makes her the perfect test case for what iconic even means in this franchise. But if Arcee's problem is recognition, the next Autobot's problem is the exact opposite. Wheeljack. Every franchise has that one genius character who should be the most important person in the room but keeps getting shoved into the background. For the Autobots, that's Wheeljack. In G1, this guy was the resident mad scientist. He built the Dinobots. He designed experimental weapons that were either brilliant or catastrophically dangerous, sometimes both in the same episode. His whole deal was pushing Cybertronian technology past its limits. And honestly, that's one of the coolest character concepts in the entire franchise. But here's where it gets frustrating. Nobody seems to know what to do with him. The Bay films brought him in as K, a quirky inventor who got unceremoniously killed off before he could do anything meaningful. IDW Comics leaned into his darker side, portraying him as an obsessive scientist willing to deploy dangerous tech regardless of collateral damage. Cool concept, barely explored. Wheeljack is proof that a great idea doesn't guarantee great screen time. But at least he's alive in most continuities, which is more than you can say for the next Autobot on this list. Ratchet. Nobody's first favorite Transformer is Ratchet. That's just a fact. He started as a background medic in G1, barely getting lines, let alone storylines. But here's the thing, he quietly became one of the best written characters in the entire franchise. Across at least 8 major continuities, Ratchet evolved from forgettable support role to the moral conscience of the Autobots. In the Bay films, he's the grounded heart of the team, delivering moments that actually feel real in movies about giant robots punching each other. Transformers Prime took it further, giving him a full emotional arc as a surrogate father figure. And IDW, they gave him genuine psychological trauma and a backstory so tragic that fans regularly argue he's more compelling than characters with triple his screen time. Ratchet is proof that the grumpy medic archetype works when you let it breathe. But not every fan favorite gets that luxury. Just ask Jazz. Jazz was the cool one. In Generation 1, he was the Autobot you actually wanted to hang out with. Street smart, quick with a line, smooth under pressure. He had more personality in his voice alone than half the roster had in their entire character bibles. The special ops agent who felt less like a soldier and more like the guy who knew every shortcut in the city. And then 2007 happened. Michael Bay's first Transformers film took this beloved, iconic character and had Megatron rip him in half, on screen. And yeah, Jazz went down swinging. He told Ironhide and Ratchet to fall back, stood his ground to protect fleeing humans, and hit Megatron with a "you want a piece of me" before getting torn apart like scrap metal. But that's almost worse. He did everything right, and it didn't matter. It told audiences that nobody was safe in this continuity. Fan favorite status meant nothing. Here's the thing, Jazz is most famous for dying. A character with decades of personality reduced to a single brutal moment. And the worst part? Nobody's properly brought him back since. Modern continuities keep him on the bench, wasting one of the most charismatic Autobots ever created. But if Jazz's death felt sudden, wait until you meet the Autobot whose entire identity was built around being too tough to kill. Ironhide. Here's a weird thing to be able to say about a Generation 1 character. The remake is better than the original. Ironhide in G1 was the Autobots' security officer. Tough, loyal, dependable. But honestly, not that interesting. He filled a role more than he occupied a personality. He was the guy who punched things and said gruff stuff, and that was about it. Then the Bay films came along and built him from scratch into something the franchise had never really had before. An aggressive old soldier. A bot who genuinely enjoyed combat. combat, who'd point cannons at a human just for looking at him wrong, who treated every situation like it was 3 seconds from becoming a firefight. That personality didn't exist in G1, Bay's team invented it, and it worked so well that it became the definitive version of the character, influencing every Ironhide that came after. Transformers Prime took it even further, keeping the signature toughness but layering an actual emotional vulnerability. You got a version of Ironhide who could be both the hardest fighter in the room and genuinely affected by loss. That's Range, which makes his death in Dark of the Moon so frustrating. He didn't go out in some heroic last stand. He didn't get a final fight. Sentinel Prime, the bot the Autobots literally just rescued, turns around and shoots him in the back. One of the live-action continuity's most beloved characters, and he gets killed by a betrayal he never saw coming. That's not a send-off, that's a sucker punch. But if Ironhide got reinvented by Hollywood, the next Autobot got reinvented by comic book writers, and the results were way more controversial. Well, every faction needs someone willing to say the thing nobody wants to hear. For the Autobots, that's Prowl. He's been their tactical officer since G1, a cold, logical, stoic police car who runs the numbers while everyone else runs on emotion. He's appeared in at least 7 major continuities, including a central role in Transformers Animated, where he actually got a substantial character arc, complete with cyber ninja training, a mentor's tragic death, and a heroic sacrifice in the finale. But here's where Prowl gets genuinely interesting. The IDW Comics took this dependable background officer and turned him into something uncomfortable, a morally compromised strategist willing to manipulate allies, pursue deeply questionable tactics, and cross lines that most Autobots wouldn't even acknowledge exist. He wasn't a villain. He was an Autobot who believed the ends justified the means. Every single time. That version split the fanbase clean in half. G1 purists want their reliable tactician back. Modern fans argue the gray area Prowl is the most compelling version precisely because he makes you question what hero actually means. Sometimes the best character writing is the kind that makes you uncomfortable, but if moral complexity is the conversation, wait until we talk about the bot who inherited a legacy he never asked for. Hot Rod walked into the 1986 Transformers movie as a cocky, impulsive kid and walked out as the most divisive character in franchise history. Because this is the guy who, depending on who you ask, either represents the boldest storytelling decision the franchise ever made, or single-handedly ruined everything by getting Optimus Prime killed. Here's what happened. During the battle with Megatron, Hot Rod intervened at exactly the wrong moment, giving Megatron the opening to fatally wound Optimus. Then, almost immediately after, Hot Rod inherits the Matrix of leadership and becomes Rodimus Prime, the new Autobot leader. Optimus is dead. This random kid is in charge now. Fans lost their minds, and honestly, they never fully recovered. The divide is still real decades later. One side sees Rodimus Prime as a legitimate successor arc that gave the franchise genuine stakes. The other side sees a character who never filled the shoes and never deserved them in the first place. But here's where it gets interesting. IDW Comics lean directly into that tension. Their Hot Rod is neurotic, ambitious, and painfully self-aware that most people think he shouldn't be leading anything. That psychological weight, the insecurity of knowing you're the replacement nobody wanted, turned him into one of the most compelling characters in modern Transformers storytelling. And yet, modern continuities have largely sidelined him, which feels like a waste, because love him or hate him, Hot Rod's Matrix storyline remains one of G1's defining dramatic moments. But if you think Hot Rod had identity problems, wait until you meet the Autobot who solved his by becoming a dinosaur. Grimlock me Grimlock King. You know the line. Everybody knows the line, and that's exactly the problem. Grimlock has been around since 1984, making him one of the oldest characters on this entire list. He transforms into a T-Rex, leads the Dinobots, and speaks in broken third person. It's iconic. It's fun, but here's the thing, it's also become a trap, because depending on which version you've seen, Grimlock is either a legitimate tactical leader with real battlefield intelligence, or he's a punchline. The Bay films leaned hard into comedy. G1 played him as simple but fierce, and fans have been arguing about which version is real for decades, but nobody talks about the IDW version. In those comics, Grimlock is a traumatized warrior carrying genuine psychological weight. He's not stupid, he's damaged. There's a version of this character that's one of the most psychologically complex Transformers ever written, and most people have never seen it because the Me Grimlock jokes are easier to sell on a lunchbox. That's the real debate. Is the comedy version charming, or is it an insult to a character who deserves better? But if you think one Transformer causes arguments, wait until you see what happens when 6 of them merge into one, Devastator. Everything we've talked about so far has been one robot, one personality, one character. Devastator broke that entire framework. 6 Constructicons, each with their own alt mode, their own personality, their own role, merging into a single massive warrior that towered over everything on the battlefield. When he debuted in G1, it wasn't just a new character, it was a new concept. The combiner mechanic changed how Hasbro designed toys, how writers built storylines, and how fans thought about power scaling for over 40 years after his introduction. And the idea itself is genuinely fascinating. 6 individuals sacrificing their autonomy to become something stronger. IDW actually explored this in depth, giving each Constructicon a distinct voice and making the internal conflict of 6 people arguing inside one body into compelling drama. But here's Devastator's curse. He shows up, he looks incredible, and then he loses. Almost every time. The franchise treats him like a spectacle rather than a genuine threat. His win record is embarrassing for a character of his size. Still, his conceptual legacy is untouchable. Every combiner that came after him exists because he proved the idea worked. But if you think a 6-robot fusion is intimidating, wait until you meet the Decepticon who makes Megatron look emotional. Shockwave. Every other Decepticon wants something. Power, revenge, recognition, respect. Shockwave doesn't want anything. He just calculates. That's what makes him terrifying. Introduced in G1 as a Decepticon scientist and strategist, Shockwave is one of the most visually distinctive designs in the entire franchise. Single Cyclops eye, gun for a hand, 0 expression. He looks like a weapon because that's exactly what he is. But his real danger isn't physical, it's philosophical. Shockwave doesn't commit atrocities out of malice or ambition. He does it because the math says it's the most efficient path to victory. There's no anger to appeal to, no ego to exploit, no emotion to manipulate. Just cold, clean logic pointed at you like a barrel. He's appeared across at least 7 major continuities, with standout roles in Transformers Prime and the 2011 Bay film. Fans felt the Bay version was massively underused considering how threatening his introduction made him seem, but IDW gave him the treatment he deserved, portraying a character whose tragedy is that he doesn't experience his own actions as tragic. He simply follows the optimal path. Fans consistently rank him as more intimidating than villains with twice his screen time. And honestly, they're right. The scariest villain in the room is the one who isn't performing. He's just doing what the numbers tell him to do. But if Shockwave is defined by silence and logic, the next Decepticon is defined by something eerily similar, except he's always listening. Soundwave. There's a reason Soundwave is one of the most beloved Decepticons ever created, and it has nothing to do with how much he talks, because he barely talks at all. Introduced in 1984 as the Decepticon Communications Officer, Soundwave's original gimmick was brilliant. He transforms into a cassette player and literally carries other Transformers inside his chest. Pop him open and out come Laserbeak, Ravage, Rumble, and Frenzy, each one a deployable weapon with its own personality. No other Transformer works like this. He's not just a soldier, he's an entire squad. But here's where it gets interesting. Soundwave's monotone, filtered voice, and near-silent efficiency aren't just cool design choices. In IDW's comics, they explored why he's like this, and the answer is genuinely tragic. Soundwave isn't loyal to Megatron because he chose to be. He's loyal because his entire existence was built around servitude. He may literally lack the autonomy to be anything other than what he is. That reframes everything. What looks like unshakable devotion might actually be a character who never had a choice in the first place. Across 8 major continuities, Soundwave remains one of the most recognizable Decepticons ever designed. Fans love him because he says less and does more than almost anyone in the franchise. But if Soundwave defines loyalty, the next Decepticon defines the exact opposite. Starscream. Every franchise needs a traitor, and Starscream has been auditioning for the role since 1984. He's Megatron's second in command across at least 9 major continuities, and in nearly every single one, the script is the same. Plot against Megatron, fail spectacularly, get punished, do it again next week. Here's the thing, that cycle sounds like a joke, and honestly, sometimes it is. But the best versions of Starscream hold comedy and tragedy in the same hand. He's ambitious enough to believe he deserves to lead, insecure enough to sabotage himself every time he gets close, and too stubborn to ever stop trying. The Bay films made him more physically threatening, which worked for those movies. But Transformers Prime is where Starscream became a genuinely complete character. That version leaned into his insecurity, his desperate need for validation, his pathetic scrambling for power, and somehow made you feel sorry for him without ever letting you forget he's a backstabbing coward. It took a character that could easily be annoying and made him sympathetic. That's hard to do. He's one of the most quoted characters in the franchise and the definitive treacherous subordinate archetype. Other shows and games have been borrowing that template for decades, but if Starscream's ambitions feel cosmic in scale, wait until you meet the character who literally eats planets. Unicron. Before Unicron showed up, Transformers was a Civil War story. Autobots versus Decepticons, fighting over energon and ideology on a dying planet. That was the ceiling. Then the 1986 film introduced a robot the size of a planet who eats entire worlds for breakfast. And suddenly, the ceiling didn't exist anymore. Unicron didn't just raise the stakes. He fundamentally changed what Transformers was allowed to be about. Here's the thing. When your villain is so catastrophically powerful that Autobots and Decepticons have to stop trying to kill each other and fight together just to survive, you've moved beyond a faction war. You've entered cosmic horror territory, and the franchise never fully came back from that shift. It didn't want to. What makes Unicron genuinely fascinating is his relationship to Primus, the creator god of the Transformers. Unicron is chaos, Primus is order. That binary sounds simple, but it gave the entire franchise a creation mythology that multiple continuities have built on for decades. It's the deepest philosophical layer Transformers has, and it exists because of one character. Now, Unicron appears in fewer continuities than almost every other character on this list. IDW used him as a multi-dimensional threat across several storylines, and the 1986 film remains his most iconic appearance. But fewer appearances don't mean less importance. Every time he shows up, he warps the entire narrative around him. He's not a character you use often. He's a character you build toward. Fans who grew up with that 1986 film treat Unicron with near mythological reverence, and honestly, they should. His introduction remains one of the most dramatically effective moments in franchise history. But if Unicron represents the ultimate external threat to all Transformers, the next character represents something arguably more dangerous. The enemy who started the war in the first place. Megatron. Every franchise needs a villain. Very few franchises have one this good. Megatron has been the face of Decepticon leadership since 1984, appearing across at least 12 major continuities over 40 years. That alone is impressive. But what makes Megatron genuinely special isn't his longevity. It's the fact that his character actually changes depending on who's writing him, and almost every version works. His alternate forms tell the story on their own. A gun in G1, a T-Rex in Beast Wars, a jet in the Bay films. Each redesign reflects what power looked like to a different generation, but the real evolution happened in his writing. Here's where it gets interesting. In some continuities, Megatron is a straightforward tyrant, pure conquest, zero remorse. In others, he's a military strategist with ideological grievances that are genuinely hard to argue with. Sometimes he's both at the same time, and that's where the character becomes something special. The IDW comics made the strongest case. In that continuity, Megatron started as a revolutionary fighting against a caste system that literally assigned your role in society based on your body type. He was right, the system was unjust, but his solution was authoritarian militarism, and he convinced himself that crushed freedom was the same as delivering. A revolutionary who became the exact thing he was fighting against. That's not a cartoon villain. That's a genuinely complex philosophical character. And here's the thing nobody expects to debate seriously. Whether Megatron or Optimus Prime has more sophisticated character depth. It sounds obvious. It's not. But to understand why, you need to look at the one character who stands on the other side of that argument. Optimus Prime. 13 major continuities. 40 years of continuous storytelling. More screen time, more page time, and more cultural weight than any other Transformer ever created. And somehow, after all of that, Optimus Prime still isn't boring. That alone should be impossible. Characters who stick around this long become cliches. They get flanderized, reduced to catchphrases, stripped of anything that made them interesting in the first place. But Optimus Prime keeps finding new angles because every continuity asks a slightly different question about him. G1 gave us the reluctant leader who never wanted the Matrix but carried it anyway. The Bay films turned him into a philosophical warrior willing to make brutal choices. Transformers Prime explored him as a grieving mentor haunted by a war he couldn't end, and IDW did something genuinely brave. It asked whether Optimus Prime's heroism was real, or whether it was militaristic ideology dressed up in noble language. That's not a safe question to ask about your franchise mascot. And the fact that the comics asked it anyway and let the answer be complicated tells you everything about how seriously this character is taken. His death in the 1986 animated film was supposed to be a toy clearance decision. Move out old product, bring in new characters. Instead, it became one of the most emotionally devastating moments in children's media history. Kids wrote letters, parents called Hasbro. The franchise spent years dealing with the fallout of killing a character that people genuinely loved. Every version of him is someone's definitive Optimus Prime. G1, Bay, IDW, Prime, Cybertron. There is no consensus, and there probably never will be, because the character isn't defined by one interpretation. He's defined by what every interpretation shares: sacrifice, responsibility, and the weight of doing what's right when it costs you everything. That's what iconic actually means. Not recognition, not merchandise, not nostalgia. It means a character so fundamentally resonant that you can rebuild him from scratch every few years and he still works every single time. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.